Like you, I'm a citizen who's had enough. I've always lived in pretty rough neighborhoods, where problems come your way even if you're not looking for them time and time again. Nowadays, Spanish citizens don't have the presumption of innocence. They have the presumption of guilt and have to clearly prove their innocence. Violent crime is on the rise across Spain, particularly in Catalonia. I have the theory, and I believe it's more than just a theory, that Morat has played a role in the creation of this phenomenon. Well, not directly Morat, because Morat is a product created by the record label, created by the elites, who have created this small urban tribe, which would be the Mec de la Rue. Our grandparents would have never allowed this. There used to be a much stronger bond between families, for example. Now, what they've done since the Agenda 2030, since the government, is break those family bonds, to create an imaginary bond with the state so that people believe it's protecting them. And really, is the state protecting the criminal? Where does that come from? The origin would be the elites. The Zionist 2030 agenda, like the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, all of them are ultimately made up of the same people who have shares among each other and, let's say, control everything in the end.
Hello everyone and welcome to the first episode of La Factoría. All this time that I've been absent, I haven't been idle or on vacation like many people thought. I've been working on improving Red Pill Podcast, launching Testament, and also creating a new space, which is the one you're witnessing right now. In this show, I want to interview anyone who is influential in terms of social criticism, philosophy, history, and entrepreneurship. This is the first of many episodes. I hope you enjoy it. And our very first episode. He's a guest who's generating a lot of buzz. His name is Jan 2030. Without fear, welcome. Now.
Thank you very much, Jota. Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate all of you who are giving me a voice because honestly, it's something that doesn't appear in the media from what I usually put out. And honestly, I really appreciate you bringing me here, man. No, thank you for coming.
The truth is you're here because you're making a lot of noise. For those who don't know, tell them who you are and why you've gone viral on social media.
Media? Good question. Look, I'm Jan and I'm just like you, a citizen who's fed up, sick of seeing so much filth in the streets, of seeing more and more crime, of not being able to walk peacefully through the streets. And before? Well, I've always lived in pretty rough neighborhoods where you really run into problems, even if you're not looking for them every now and then. So, I wanted to stop having these kinds of problems, so I started recording it. Everything, to avoid legal issues, as these lowlifes may report you afterwards.
What legal repercussions? Why legal repercussions? What do you mean? I'm going to play the role
Of someone
who doesn't know who you are and who doesn't
has cracked up.
with your videos. Okay, but for the one who's watching you at home, what legal repercussions? Why? What do you do when you go out on the street with the camera?
Of course, I've spent my whole life defending myself with spray. Spray, what is it? Spray? Is it pepper spray that's approved? It contains pepper that's approved for civilian use, and constitutionally, any civilian can use it if it's for self-defense. What was the problem? That it wasn't proven to be self-defense. Why? Because it wasn't recorded. Because nowadays, Spanish citizens don't have the presumption of innocence. They have the presumption of guilt and have to clearly prove their innocence. I started recording everything, but not with the intention of creating content. What happened is that some videos turned out so cool that they went viral, and here we are. All right, Jan.
So, before you had the social media character of Jan 2030 Fearless, have you ever found yourself in certain altercations involving people with criminal behavior intending to rob you or harm you? But it wasn't recorded. I mean, your civilian life, let's say civilian, already had certain altercations. Tell us a little about that past life and why did you decide to start recording while you were pepper spraying alleged offenders or criminals?
Exactly, this is what was happening to me, that I needed to prove my innocence. Why? Because I had problems, I was in poor neighborhoods, I used to walk around there. I never take the subway, for example, I walk everywhere. So what happened was that, well, like you said, Joda, they tried to attack me, they tried to rob me, And I always saw a defenselessness on the part of citizens who work like us. because we are defenseless against all of this. So what happened? Well, first I was burned out. With all of this, I started making political content, sharing news. When I had a confrontation on the street, I would initially record it with my phone. To be more discreet, I started wearing glasses. And one of these videos went pretty viral around Valdebaran, the one you mentioned that you sprayed my colleague with a mist, the one recorded with the Ray-Ban glasses, that one. It went pretty viral, so right after that video, I had a little problem where I had to stay in a small room for reasons that aren't relevant here. I've been in a small room for a month, and I was feeling really bad in that small room. So I decided to take advantage of the momentum from that viral video and the discomfort of that small room, being in such an uncomfortable situation. I decided to use it as motivation to go out and do 4-hour live streams. Because I like walking around showing the reality in marginalized neighborhoods. Because it's something you don't see on television, and I think it's awful that this isn't shown on television. And I think I have the duty to speak for all these defenseless people whose problems really aren't being talked about. Okay.
A question. When you talk about these issues that aren't shown on television, imagine that a lot of Hispanic Americans are watching us from Argentina, Mexico, Venezuela, and Colombia. Which issue are you referring to?
Well, look, above all, what we're seeing, especially in Catalonia, but throughout Spain, is an increase in violent crime, robberies with force, sexual assaults, stabbings. All these types of crimes are rising exponentially. And this is directly proportional to the increase in migratory pressure. With this ridiculous migration model we have, which creates a criminal comfort zone for the worst criminals in the world. Especially these repeat offenders that we're importing from Africa, who are being sent to us by countries like Morocco as a kind of biological weapon because of differences they've had with the government of Spain due to the negligent attitude and geopolitical stance of Pedro Sanchez.
Okay, I understand. So the issue you're referring to is the insecurity in the streets.
And
your intention was to go out and document it while you were recording. At first you did it with Ray-Ban. The video of you sprayed me went really viral for you, right? Are you the one who sprayed my friend with a spray? He was left thinking. And from there, did you decide to start doing live streams? Exactly. Tell us a little bit. Why did you decide to do live streams?
Actually, I've wanted to do live streams for a long time, but I didn't have the equipment or enough followers for it to be relevant. So I decided to take advantage of that momentum to start going live and show all of this, to do long streams, and little by little, more people started joining in. What happened? I started that less than a month ago when I had 300 followers on YouTube and on Twitter.
And now? How many after?
Now more than 30,000 on Twitter and almost 30,000 on YouTube. Congratulations. Thank you very much. And I want to
emphasize that you have balls that reach your ankles.
Well, sometimes I've taken a bit of a risk, but I really think it's always pretty calculated and that I do what I have to do. I mean, I would say that my videos can be used as pretty educational in terms of what should be done for self-defense. Of course, I don't encourage people to look for trouble or anything like that. But if you see that you're being cornered, these sprays that I use, the sprays everyone calls ham-flavored, which are certified pepper sprays. Any Spanish citizen can use them, as long as they can prove it's self-defense. Because before I recorded all that, I've had maybe 6 trials, not serious ones, but I've still paid an average of 200 euros in civil liability for damages. But I have a question for
you. Under what circumstances before you recorded all these events? Were you reported for using that spray?
Yes, well, always, 4 times for defending myself. Defending yourself, but can you tell, for example, an anecdote? Here, in this space, I want to make it clear that despite
that I align myself with the ideas, I like to get the most out of people by questioning them. Do I like it? Because there are many people who will wonder, right? Does this guy always hang out with his close friends? So, you look for them, you provoke them, and beforehand, how do those altercations start for you? Is it normal once you go out on the street? Those are my questions.
Of course, it's not on every street, it's in the slums, especially on the outskirts. Hey, nuance.
This also occurs in downtown Barcelona, not just in the slums. Can downtown Barcelona be considered a slum?
Well, downtown Barcelona, the old town. I would consider it a slum, although it's not as marginalized as the outskirts, but it's really very run down. It was just that nuance. Go on. And so, for example, you asked me for an anecdote, one of those that inspired me to do all this. I lived in a neighborhood on the outskirts, one of the many I've lived in. I can tell you about it. For example, some kids who tried to rob me near a party area in Badalona. And well, I sprayed them with gas and all that because they were trying to rob me and they attacked me. I had very little gas with me, always carry a bit extra. It's better to have too much than not enough. So they don't go hungry, man, because if they go hungry, it's almost worse. And then they threw a half-empty bottle of whiskey at me and messed up my elbow a bit. Another situation like this happened to me when I went through a park where they used to hang out. Now that situation has calmed down a bit, but before there were a lot of minors in many parks in Barcelona, especially on the outskirts. There were gangs of very young kids, most of them Maghrebi, underage. Yes, underage, but between 13 and 18 years old, I would say. So one of these gangs, I underestimated them. You should never underestimate an enemy, no matter how much of a drug addict they are. I underestimated them and they surrounded me, and well, I was also making fun of them and they beat me up. So that happened to me when I was 15 years old. The same a couple of times, and from, well, a couple of situations like that and others unrelated to this. Well, these things can either bring you down or you can use them to become indestructible. And I humbly think that, well, all of this has really made me much stronger. Okay, Jan, I have a
question. Earlier you said that in order to defend yourself, before things got worse, you even had to go to court.
How is that?
That you were reported because of these situations. Tell us a little about that experience.
Yes, because these people, in my opinion, are quite protected by the police. Now we would start discussing theories, and I think some of them are informants, etc. But above all, if you cause them any harm, or if they say you've caused them any harm, then they'll try to report you. And that's what happened to me. Well, not always, because many times it ended up being nothing, but yeah, it has happened to me. They've even tried to break into my home, and I defended myself with spray, and they reported me. So they've
tried to break into your house and...
for defending your home with
a device that is approved and is...
legal.
Have you been reported? And that report...
was it accepted for processing? Exactly, but that's precisely why, because since I didn't record it, I couldn't prove that all of that was self-defense. Where did this delayed break-in happen? I mean, where did you gas them? Right at the door of my apartment, from the door of my apartment.
And what were they trying to do? Were they trying to break in by force? What were they?
I'm unsure what I was trying to do. At first, an argument was keeping me awake, so I started tapping on the floor. The thing is, they were very troublesome neighbors. In this case, they were from here. And we're coming back to a question you asked me, which we overlooked, and I think it's very important. You were telling me that, yes, I think so, because my critics on Twitter all say that I'm provoking people. Some people claim you're a provocative, fear-mongering, far-right fascist. Is that accurate? Of course, veiled the biggest provocation I make, which I don't see as such. Of course, it's wearing a camera on my head and not even pointing it at anyone's face. Not even with enough resolution for anyone to be recognized. I'm just walking by to show the deterioration of the neighborhoods around the hotspots. What's going on? They take it as an offense, this thing about carrying a camera. I don't really know why. So they threaten me. They often try to attack me. Sometimes I manage to dissuade them, but frequently I don't. In one of my live streams, I went to La Florida, a terrible no-go zone. It's pretty bad there.
It's famous for being violent.
That's precisely where Morat's pals are located. It's an extremely dark and dangerous area, the worst no-go zone I've encountered. I don't recommend anyone go there at night, especially on a weekend.
Why did you say Morat's buddies? I think that's an interesting point.
Exactly, that's also an interesting point. I have the theory, and I think it's more than just a theory, that Morat has influenced the creation of this phenomenon. Morat is not directly responsible because they are a product created by the record label, which is run by the elites who have created this small urban tribe, which would be the Mec de la Rue, in French Mec de la Rue, who are kids lifted up, always young, lifted up by this whitewashing of the songs of people like Morat, by this clothing, this whitewashing of theft, delinquency, drug trafficking. They see him as an idol, as an example to follow. And they all wear the same uniform. They wear the Gucci cap, the tracksuit that's usually from Paris Saint-Germain, the caps, the Nike-tuned or Vapor Max sneakers. It's a fact that in holding cells, 9 out of 10 inmates wear these exact sneakers and 2 or 3 sport the Gucci cap. So it's something that as soon as they have a bit of money, they buy it, and if not, they wear it. Fake.
I think it's usually fake.
Usually, yes, but there are also many who traffic or steal and so on. Actually, when they catch a cell phone thief, it's not because they're chasing a single stolen phone, it's because they find out that there are 70 phones in that house. And that's when they go in. They say, man, this guy has 70 devices in his house. I like the moral point.
Now let's get back to the topic of... You provoke people to attack you because you usually get into quite a few altercations while walking around. So what would you say to your critics who say that...
You are a provocateur? Well, I always tell them the same thing. I tell them they should do what I do, put a GoPro on their head, and walk for 4 hours through these slums. Let's see if they have any problems, or let's see if... Well, then they can come and tell us about it afterwards. If they haven't had their faces smashed in, of course, because in La Florida they won't get involved, I can assure you of that.
Serious courage is required to get involved in La Florida.
Or maybe be a little reckless too. Which one do you think it is?
Of the two? Are you gutsy or just reckless?
Look, let's say that doesn't scare me. But why? Because I'm much more afraid of the consequences of doing nothing. I'm much more afraid of Pedro Sanchez and the policies we're experiencing right now in our country than of these people, than of them. Also, I honestly think that if we go prepared, go to the gym, eat well, wake up early, and get some sun, we have a huge advantage over these drug addicts who get up at 7 in the evening. They go to the park to do drugs, and all they do is steal from people. So, besides that, I admit that I was a bit reckless going to Florida without being properly prepared, because I was good. I had been having a few rough weeks. I couldn't stick to my diet. I couldn't go to the gym. In fact, I've been like this for 2 months, but now I'm gonna get back to my gym and diet routine, which is really what I recommend to everyone, because health comes first.
Health comes first. And I want to tell you something. At the end of the day, all those people who criticize you for provoking, for carrying a camera, isn't it different from if you go and insult a group of kids who are in a park, even if they're smoking joints? I don't think anyone should go insult anyone. But when I've watched your videos, I've never had that feeling that you go after people, that you don't even interact with them unless they come to interact with you. In fact, what I've seen quite a bit is an attempt to dissuade, and I've even seen warnings. Before the famous ham-flavored Sprite arrives, I'm warning you, don't come closer. So why do you think part of the Spanish population, despite having the evidence in front of them that you're just walking around your country, on your streets, which not long ago were safe, they side with the criminals?
Look, I'm going to answer you very simply. He used to say, if I'm not mistaken, Mark Twain said that it's harder to teach someone they've been deceived than to deceive them. It's simpler to trick someone than to reveal they've been tricked.
I love that phrase.
Exactly. So these people have their indoctrination, they have their story in their heads, which might have made a little bit of sense. 2 ago, yes, I love it. That phrase. Did it have any argument that could support it? But nowadays, with the facts in hand, with the events that are happening every day, no, I don't think so. No, their opinion isn't honest. Honestly, no, it can't be based. It can't be a sincere opinion. I'm not convinced that that's not the case.
Do you think they do it out of malice or out of sheer ignorance?
Either one or the other, yes, or sometimes it's a mix of both, because sometimes one thing leads to the other. It's like, no. It can't be that you are, either it's out of malice and ignorance, or just out of malice. And well, ideology, which also seems a bit derogatory to me, to base your opinion solely on ideology. I will always be more of a defender of everything tangible, of data, of statistics, and well, nobody is God either. We all have an ideological stain, so to speak, a bias that we have to admit. Everyone has an ideology. I would argue that everyone is racist to some extent, as we all have prejudices, though the degree varies from person to person. But I would say that everyone, all cultures and all people, have some racism in them.
What do you mean by racism? If by racism you mean thinking you're superior, I don't think so. If by racism you mean being suspicious of the unknown, and I might be able to buy that it's something wired into us. Still, I've been thinking, what if? Then it's true that once you get to know people and interact with them, well, personally, I don't consider myself someone who has any kind of racial motivation. In fact, I think Spain has always been a country in which mixing has been the norm. First, we mixed between Celtiberians and Romans. Then we mixed between Goths, Visigoths, and Romans. Then we mixed with all the native tribes of America. I don't really buy into that very nationalist part that talks about the racial issue. It's not something that motivates me. It's not something I consider very Spanish or Hispanic, but I do understand what you're trying to tell me. Earlier, you said something that I think is extremely important that you said. That obviously you're afraid of the consequences of getting involved in these neighborhoods. From time to time, but you're much more afraid of the long-term consequences of doing nothing. Do you think your example could motivate other people to
rise up? That's a great question. I don't want anyone risking their life, doing anything crazy, or putting themselves in danger. That's why you shouldn't imitate what I do for free or try to create these kinds of situations. I would never recommend that. Even so, I do think that this, exactly what you're saying, is one of the main reasons why I do this. To teach people that we have to stand up for ourselves, that if we don't defend ourselves, they'll keep taking more and more from us. And that's one of the main problems with Spanish society, that really in general we're cowards. If we compare ourselves, for example, with the Russians don't have this problem. Because if someone attacks 4 or 5 people and hurts them, they end up hanging in the square. It's just a saying, but...
And to what extent do you think the law is to blame for this? Because the problem is, let's go back 100 years. 1915, not 1925. Imagine people from outside come and they start making life impossible for your women, for your children. I often imagine myself in that situation, and I believe that's what would have occurred. The people who had always lived there would have taken charge and imposed order if justice didn't take care of it. Nowadays, doing something like that would have many more consequences. For the local and for the one who decides to put order in his house than for the person who is causing chaos. Nowadays, it seems, or at least it feels like criminals are more protected. What do you think?
About that, of course, I totally agree. Our grandparents would have never allowed this. Before, there was a much stronger bond between families, for example. Now, what they've done since the 2030 agenda from the governments is break those family bonds. To have an imaginary bond with the state so that they believe it is protecting them. And really, the state is actually protecting the criminal. We see it like this in many ways, to begin with, because the criminal will always be insolvent and won't pay any fines. And they don't have a job, well, the criminal, let's say. We're not discussing immigrants or any race in general. This is simply how it occurs. What other factors are involved? They're getting organized and the police don't have enough resources. Besides, there are political orders not to give any reason for them to be called racists. What's happening is that only 2 police officers go. And it might be a 99-pound woman and an overweight 143-pound man. They really can't face a gang of 15 people on scooters with knives. I mean, it's just not possible. I understand them. It's easier to search me, to try to see if they can give me a fine. As outrageous as it is. Yeah, what's going on? That you and I, Jota, can defend ourselves or we can run away. But what about a disabled person, a woman, or an elderly person? These people have no way to defend themselves, and what they do is impose a curfew on them. The neighbors in Raval tell the elderly people, the police directly tell the elderly people that after 7 in the evening, it's better not to go out.
I'm going to tell you an anecdote, not just to the elderly. I remember that I went to Ibiza one summer with a friend of mine named Yuso. I send him my regards from here, and we spent a couple of days in Barcelona before taking the ferry to Ibiza. I remember that there were 3 young guys. My friend is also strong, we work out. I'm 1 meter 80 tall, I weigh 90 kilos back then. You don't seem. No, not at all. And I remember what they told me, I was impressed. We were around the Montjuic area, we were going in through the back where there are some parks and sand areas.
And so on. They told me,
guys, don't go in here, don't go in here. I advise against carrying knives as we search people for weapons daily. You're not local, are you? First it was that, you're not from around here, right? No, we're not from Madrid, so I don't know. Worried? What are you doing here? Get out. But I already stayed quite a while. Even so, we went in. I have to admit that nothing happened. I don't look like a victim, but something could have happened to me. And honestly, that really stuck with me. I mean, even young people, back then I was 27 years old, perfectly capable of defending myself, also had curfews imposed on them.
It's not just older people. No, of course. And warnings? I'm telling you, no matter how strong we are, there are areas where there's a danger that you have to see it. You have to accept it. That danger is there and you have to be aware of it. You have to watch your surroundings, you have to be alert, and that's normal. In 80% of the neighborhoods in Barcelona, only 2 or 3 are safe, which would be Sarria, l'Eixample, and parts of Gratia and Sant Gervasi are safe. But even in these upscale neighborhoods, we're already starting to see tents everywhere. These are problems of people who can't adapt, who won't be able to adapt. And really what has happened is that the NGOs have brought them here, which I think are the main ones to blame for all this, the ones behind it, the ones who are pocketing the subsidies. And then they leave them abandoned to their fate on the street. Because it's not the fault of these people who are promised the world to bring them here. And then they abandon them. They're left abandoned by the institutions in tents in our children's park. And what are these people going to do? Well, sell drugs, steal whatever they can. And is this really the fault of the NGOs, of the well-meaning European policies, especially Spanish ones that were here letting everyone in? And for example, the requirements to enter our humanitarian aid program, you can literally check this in the official state gazette, are having entered illegally by boat or through Ceuta and Melilla. Then you enter the humanitarian aid program, the NGOs take care of you, you can go to a hotel, you can go to a center. But for us, there isn't any. Me, for example, my mother kicked me out of the house when I was 15, and from about 18 to 20, I was homeless. The issue of the
NGOs, do you think that NGOs, as you were telling me before while we were talking, were directly responsible
for this
situation? And that many times these people who are at risk of social exclusion are also victims of this migration system, which I also believe.
Tell us a little more about that point, exactly. NGOs and foundations are the main ones to blame for 50,000 people dying every year in the Mediterranean and for the skyrocketing violent crime in Europe especially. And for these people later being out on the streets without resources, without a trade or any benefits, and without the possibility of getting a job. Because who is going to hire an illiterate ex-convict who comes from somewhere else? Who really comes from a totally different culture and has nothing to do with ours? So I, for example, in the very center where I was, well, I saw perfectly how
in the center where you were?
Yes, forgive me, but maybe this hadn't come out yet. I had no idea you had been in a center, and I think
that the audience deserves to know how it is that you were
in a center. Yes, I was in a juvenile center from the age of 17 until 17 and 8 months. You were 8 months in a juvenile center. I ran away because I couldn't take it anymore. However, this whole running away thing is in quotation marks. They constantly remind you that you can leave anytime. That's right, they keep your identification, but well, you can leave whenever you want. Why? Because it's in their interest for you to leave. So that an illegal immigrant can come, for whom they get more subsidy. So, sorry to interrupt you, I don't like doing this, but
so that people find out, and myself as well. The NGOs or shelters or youth centers receive a different amount of money, depending on the nationality of the person they take in.
Inside? Yes, yes, even the bosses themselves admitted that to us, let's say. I don't know if bosses is the exact word right now, but, well, the people in charge at that center, let's say they pressured us to the 1 or 2 Spaniards. For every 40 Moroccans there were, they tried to pressure the Spaniards to leave. And that way a Moroccan could come in, and while they didn't say it to us directly, they did hint at it. Well, because there are centers that are fully subsidized by the state, 100%, and there are others that are half state and half foundation. So it would be like a chartered center, let's say, and in those centers already. For example, when I was there, which was 16 years ago, we already saw it. This phenomenon of people making up their age, which in theory are centers for people under 18 years old. And we had Africans there with beards who looked like they had 3 kids. And all the educators who were total hippies all knew this was a scam, and they know it. And in fact, more and more educators are contacting us. I don't know if they contact you, but they contact me, well, giving me testimonies like this. And what happens after the center when they're already 18? If they've been in the center the required amount of time, then they put 4 or 5 of them, or sometimes more, in a government-subsidized apartment. Back then, together, they might have paid 100 euros. Now they pay 300. I think it comes out to about 50 euros each. If a young middle-class Spaniard can't become independent, no middle-class youth can. But these people go first. That is to say, Jan,
With your experience inside a shelter and with the testimonies that have been given to you directly, it could be openly said that this migration model is a business that brings a lot of money to those who are part of it.
Of course, this is a racket, and right now it's the racket. It's the racket that's in fashion. A few years ago, especially feminism started. Feminism is already a bit out of fashion now. Are people tired of this abject supremacism? There are more and more brave women who won't put up with this anymore, no matter how many privileges all these laws give them. Then came the green policies, like replacing our fields with solar panels and wind farms. And all of this is also counterproductive for our society. I mean, we're selling all our greatest assets to the big American investment funds. And all of this has been done, especially by this government. And right now, the biggest scam of all is illegal immigration, and they're making money off of it. All the educators, NGOs, a lot of people. These are clientelist structures whose purpose is to look for voters. Because people are getting more and more tired of this absurd socialism, which leads us nowhere, which is destroying the country, and the economic data is completely stagnant. 20 years ago, Romania and countries like that, Estonia, Cyprus, all of them, had half the gross domestic product we did. Now they're leaving us behind in per capita income and possibly gross domestic product as well.
But in per capita income, absolutely.
And still,
I remember the story of Broncano, saying on a Mamerto Sirojillo show that Estonia, a country like Estonia, making fun of Estonia, Estonia already has a per capita income and a better economic standard of living than Spain.
and thanks to liberal policies, just like Ireland, for example. Attracting investment, that's the most logical thing, just like Morocco is doing, for example. Morocco is attracting investment. Morocco has some geopolitical actions, a pretty good domestic policy. Of course, I would want that for us, for Spain. An alliance with the United States, with Israel, even for us. Well, Pedro Sanchez has gone against all these countries that could perfectly well be our allies, even Morocco as well. And what happens? Now they're bossing us around, and this is a fact. These are the facts. And King Mohammed VI has granted a huge amnesty to many repeat offenders who were former prisoners, on the condition that they go to Spain, that they leave the country. And Israel is doing the same thing, because Pedro Sanchez came out saying, no, Israel is committing genocide. I don't know what. Very smart, because now Israel says that we are obligated to take in refugees and asylum seekers from the Gaza Strip. Let's remember that the Gaza Strip, I mean the country next to it, which is Egypt, has a huge fence with barbed wire so that no one can cross from the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, I've always been really curious about the whole issue of Middle Eastern refugees, how The migration movement has always been directed towards Europe when the closest countries and Muslim Brotherhood countries have always closed their doors to them. Whether it's Egypt, Iran, or Saudi Arabia, those countries don't accept them. On the other hand, Europeans seem to be obligated because of this well-meaning mental conditioning to welcome everyone. And unfortunately, Europe, since these welcome refugees migration policies have been implemented, mainly promoted by Angela Merkel, is increasingly a continent more insecure and
more uprooted. Yes, it's just that every month we're seeing at least one attack. In Germany, there's an attack every month. We've had 3 or 4 months in a row now with a major attack every month in Germany. In Europe, there are generally around 5 to 6 attacks per month. Is that something? There are more and more chances also in Spain, as Ruben Pulido himself says, that there will be more Islamist attacks. Cells are being taken down all the time, guys who were preparing people for live attacks to carry out attacks right away. And is the problem really that big? And is Pedro Sanchez so out of his mind that people, for example, from Pakistan, people from which countries? The most logical thing would be to cross through Greece, which is also easy through the mountains from Turkey, or to enter through Lampedusa in Italy. But instead, they travel 10,000 kilometers more to enter through Spain to apply for this already mentioned humanitarian aid program, which for them is like hitting the jackpot.
There's a question I want to ask you. You're quite critical when it comes to the topic of immigration. And it's true that in your comments, and you yourself sometimes say that the chef's specialty is peppered broccoli, right?
Was it something like that? Yes, exactly. Why broccoli and why ham-flavored pepper? Tell us a little bit about it.
About the chef's specialty. And why are you specifically targeting that particular group of the population?
Yes, look, me above all. I didn't create this, but I've noticed it's something that their comments, correct? It's always the best part of the internet. For me, it's the comments, for example, on Twitter and stuff. And you can learn quite a lot from some comments, direct messages. Honestly, I mostly laugh. If I want to learn, I read a book. But if I go to read a post, I usually crack up at the comments. Alive, very creative, very clever. Yeah, people are hilarious. Yes. Sometimes I pick up expressions that I see in the comments, and I know this expression is going to be a hit, so I make a tweet out of it. So broccoli with pepper flavor, not ham flavor, pepper whatever. The broccoli with pepper thing mainly refers to the characteristic hairstyle that most of them have. I mean, it's not like most people say that it's just because of their curly hair. It's not that the hairstyle is like broccoli. A Spanish person can also have broccoli hair. That's perfectly possible. There are a lot of people lately who curl their hair on purpose, you know? Also pay attention, keep that in mind, okay? And what about the ham? Well, it's something that, for example, a lot of people might tell you is something racist, something meant to offend Muslims. I have nothing against Muslims as long as they don't want to impose anything on me. What I do, I feel the same way. Of course, religion. I'm a liberal, so whatever religion someone practices doesn't matter to me. Especially if they don't impose it on me, especially if they don't impose it on my children and so on. So why do I talk so much about ham? First, because it's a joke that I know works well. It's marketing on one hand, but on the other hand, for me, it's something very tied to my identity. Ham, I'm a fan of ham from all the different regions. It's very much a part of my identity. Spanish, exactly. And will ham still be eaten here, or will this stop being Spain? Exactly. And besides, it's a very healthy food that I recommend to everyone, even to Muslims. I mean, really, because it has a lot of omega fats, some of the healthiest ones, and a lot of protein too. While the term superfood is often overused, ham can be considered a nutritious food choice. Liver and all the organs, including the pig's brain, are also healthy options. I enjoy eating every part of the pig. Consuming fat is often demonized, but it's essential for proper brain function. I agree, that's a topic for another deep conversation. The bad thing is sugar, not fat, especially sugar. And, well,
we could talk about big pharma, we could talk about how it's connected to the food industry. Exactly, how much power do these bastards have?
Those are the
ones who really control everything?
Exactly, but I
want to get back to the point. Pepper broccoli flavor.
Ham, the chef's specialty. That's the chef's specialty, of course, with pepper. Especially because they're seasoned with the gas. They end up, I mean, I got this from the comments. They always tell me the chef's seasoned touch. I don't know. So this really sticks with me. They are clever and creative. Many of those who usually comment. I want to tell you something.
I have a large Arab community.
I care about them immensely, with a great deal of affection
And a lot of respect.
for many of them. And
I want you to send them a message because I
repeat the same thing. Of course, gentlemen,
I'm from Venezuela. I was born in Venezuela. I don't know if you knew that. It sounded familiar. Yes. I always say this, and it's the following. I'm going to tell a little story first because I think it's important. The other day I was talking to a girl who was Moroccan, and I said to her, unfortunately, there are many of your fellow countrymen who are doing a lot of harm here. The reaction was defensive, with people saying not all of us are like that in a negative way, instead of acknowledging the issue positively. I think that creates much more rejection than acknowledging that there is a problem. I know, going back to the fact that I'm Venezuelan, a lot of Venezuelans who are tired of the marginal attitude, the criminal attitude, and the messes we're causing.
In other Hispanic American countries, there has been massive immigration due to Venezuelan socialism.
The United States, for example, and we don't justify ourselves by saying that not all of us are like that and get defensive. No, we need to have control over who comes in. And I think the most sensible thing, if you are a Maghrebi person, if you are an Algerian person, if you are a Moroccan person and you want a decent life here and you don't want prejudice, is that these kinds of people who are creating a bad reputation based on their actions, and it's not because of racism, should just get the hell out. Pardon the expression, but what would you say to those people? Because I think it's much more positive for the rest of them who come here to do things right. That there should be regulation and that the bad apples should be expelled. Than the attitude of making excuses. And
not all of us always think logically, of course. I would say to all these Moroccan people, Muslims, Arabs, who work, who pay their taxes, who have come here to contribute because they exist. I would say to them, of course, there are many, especially those who have been here for a while, many of them have already integrated, and I would tell all of them that they are the first ones who need to start pointing out their compatriots who are causing trouble, because this is, you can't cover the sun with one finger. They're causing trouble, and in a wild way. And if they're not the first ones to stand up to this mob, what's going to happen, and it's already happening, is that people are going to become more and more racist. Not racist, not me, well, xenophobic. It's not that everyone... No, racism doesn't inevitably grow, but racist movements can certainly expand.
that in the end, unfortunately,
you won't be able to tell the difference. And they're going to end up
the innocent paying for the guilty.
I always use that same expression that in the end they're all going to be hated, or it'll be hard to tell them apart. Or are we
going to end up in a social conflict over racial, cultural, and religious issues? Well, look, Talita, it's
what Spain is facing. Yes, because there are a lot of people, I see it on Twitter, who say, no, we have to kick them all out because you never know. Which one is a terrorist? Which one is illegal? Which one is faking it? What do you think? No, I don't agree with that at all. You're not aligned with that? Not at all. I understand why they say that, but no, man. I mean, it's like, for example, the son of a diplomat who was born abroad. Are you going to tell him he's not Spanish? There's no reason for that.
Personally, I'm telling you that I don't support that either, because it would affect a lot of people I care about.
Immense. And where do you draw the line? That's the thing. And I always say the same thing.
You are the ones who have
the greatest responsibility
so that this situation doesn't get out of control, because disorder and chaos always end up creating
an extremely strong reaction. And sometimes
uncontrollable of order and law,
and that order and law
might end up taking you down. I think we're already on a fine line where either we take action now or the generations of Spaniards to come will become more and more racist. People may become more intolerant and radical, losing interest in learning about both the good and the bad. They're just going to say, everyone can go to hell. And I think that could become dangerous.
Exactly. This is a reaction that we're not going to say is good or bad, but it's a natural reaction. In any case, 100%. Look, I'm not judging it. I'm just pointing it out. Exactly. And we can see it. For example, Twitter is a social network that doesn't have much censorship, and we can see it there. More than that, there are constant references to dictators all the time. that have been in the history of Europe, especially to the Austrian painter. It's debatable whether they're left-wing or right-wing, as that's precisely what's being discussed. Considered totalitarian far-right. Exactly, totalitarians. And it's something that really makes sense because, for example, Bukele is a totally totalitarian guy. He's a guy who now, for example, there are no lawyers in El Salvador. I mean, if they catch you in a park, you're done for just being in the wrong place. But what about me? I can actually support Bukele on certain things because El Salvador needed shock therapy. It was a country ruled by the gangs, and all these criminal groups imposed their own law. People couldn't go out on the streets. And this little by little with all due differences. But is something similar happening in Spain? I don't think we need a Bukele, but if we reach the point of no return, in the end, we really will need him. Because it's going to be the only way out. I'm going to ask you a question. Is your name Jan?
2030, don't be afraid, 2030. It could be summed up as what you're looking for is more control. Exactly.
Going back to the topic of Bukele.
I'm going to correlate the 2 points. Do you think that this surge in illegal immigration and its direct relationship with insecurity could be a plan to exercise that kind of control in the future? To sell it to the people? I take away your rights, I give you security like Bukele, like in El Salvador with Bukele. Because I've thought about it many times and I say maybe. They're generating this
insecurity to
in the future tell you, here's the solution. And that solution usually always involves a loss of rights. And Spain never needed a police state in the last 20 or 30 years, but that police state is becoming more and more necessary. Because of a situation that our own policies are creating, and our own policies, you could say, are sold out to this
globalist agenda.
Therefore, I leave you with that thought.
There, and I'd like you to give me your point of view. Naturally, and in fact, I use very similar words. I mean, I say exactly what you just said. I say that too. That they are promoting this massive and uncontrolled legal immigration on purpose to create insecurity. So that later they can sell us on our security because they care so much about us. Are they going to sell us facial recognition cameras everywhere? A police state where we lose our rights and can't even speak on social media. What will they have to do to us? Well, now this thing has come out that they're going to make us rectify whenever they feel like it. The 15-minute cities where we won't be able to leave our district, or maybe only twice a month. Well, renewable energy, let's say what they're doing is buying obsolete technology from China, which is the most polluting country in the world. What kind of green policy is that? And more things. The digital currency that you'll have to spend, or else, well, it disappears. You'll have to spend it within a certain time. All of this is a package. And that's exactly why, well, just like you connected it with my name, that's exactly where my name came from, which is what I used for my channels. Let's say 2030 without fear, because I'm not afraid of 2030. Although it is scary, of course. I mean, it's normal. It does scare me, honestly, but we have to
act loose.
Let go of fear and act, of course. Well, Jan?
Speaking of the 2030 agenda, I consider you an equal. In this social and cultural war, I think you've chosen, let's say, a side that stands against this globalist agenda. Have you chosen your niche? I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, about illegal immigration and exposing its consequences in terms of crime. I've chosen more the topic of feminism, and not so much feminism itself, but rather to make people see the dangers of feminism for the family. I mean, I feel that feminism attacks the family a lot, but the 2030 agenda has many more aspects.
Exactly. They're all parts of the same problem, and all these problems come from the same source. Feminism, I also deal with these topics. Feminism, environmentalism, illegal immigration. I think they all have the same origin, and they all serve the same purpose. What is that origin? Well, the origin would be the elites, the Agenda 2030, the big investment funds, which are the ones that own most of the companies in the IBEX,
Who would manage the investment funds?
In your opinion? Yes, basically, if you follow the money, it would be the big Zionist families, like the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and the big American banks, which are all ultimately made up of the same people who have shares in each other's companies, and let's say they control everything in the end.
Very brave to say it. I've said it a few times myself, and it's not something everyone likes to hear. Honestly, Jan, I really enjoyed this interview. You're someone I admire a lot, because it takes a lot of guts, really. Not only to face this agenda intellectually, but also you've taken it to another level, and you do it in a practically physical way as well. Just like, for example, my colleague Rescue You, who also physically faces the hordes of Pokemon, as I call them. But you don't face Pokemon, you face possible physical consequences. So, to wrap up this interview, I wanted to ask you, what solutions are we putting on the table? I don't like being the typical person like, for example, Pablo Iglesias, who I don't think either of us are big fans of. He was someone who, as I became more mature politically and ideologically, I listened to a lot, and he pointed out many problems that were real.
Now,
Alright, so what solutions do we offer? That's where we set ourselves apart. Because I think that people from the far left of the political spectrum, as well as people from the far right, and even those from the ultra-libertarian spectrum, we agree on the problems. It's in the solutions where we have very strong disagreements. What would Jan's solutions be? 2030, without fear.
I have it pretty clear. To begin with, the immigration model is obsolete. It's a total failure. So the first thing I would do, like any serious country, is close the southern border. Not just anyone should be able to cross. And it's not just that they let anyone cross, they're actually subsidizing it. So it's exactly the opposite of what should be done. For example, Australia's no way policy is quite interesting because it totally discourages people from coming illegally. Exactly, illegally, of course. That's always an important distinction to make. People who arrived illegally by boat were taken to a port in a third country with which they had an agreement, and that way, illegal arrivals stopped. So I believe that immigration can be a great asset for a country, it can be a great asset for us. Especially if it is orderly, legal, and above all, if that immigration is well selected. With people, for example, who speaking the language or having a degree makes integration easier, not only in Hispanic America, but also in the Philippines and Equatorial Guinea, where they speak the same language. But are we all Hispanic? At the end of the day, of course. And above all, we have to make sure that they are not illiterate people and that they have demonstrable skills. With a resume, and not a criminal resume like the ones we're bringing in. They'll say these are far-right exaggerations, but this is proven every day by the abominations happening in our country. And no, it can't be.
So, would you copy the successful models regarding migration that exist in the world, for example, Australia's, to solve this problem?
Of course. And what about what we already have here? Good question. That's something we also need to clarify, because there are a lot of people who say that everyone should be deported en masse. No, I don't agree with that. I'm very clear that repeat offenders shouldn't be allowed to reach that level of repeat offending. By the third or fourth similar crime, especially, or by the first or second violent crime, once it's proven, because that's another thing. We have the presumption of innocence. We here usually don't have it. And those from outside? It depends. It depends on what the illegal immigrant has done. But we must remove all troublemakers and those who isn't facing consequences. Another thing is that they have to face those consequences. If not, we're encouraging them to come here and set up their mafias, their criminal comfort zones, like Samuel Sanchez says, Samuel Vasquez. Sorry, I always confuse him with the cyclist. A great guy, Samuel, a great guy. For me, the top expert in criminology and Spain, and the one who explains all this most clearly, who has an undeniable way of speaking, because in the end, criminology is an objective and demonstrable science, of course. So, as he himself says, shouldn't we avoid creating criminal comfort zones? The worst criminals from all over the world come here to hide. The bosses of the big mafia hiding in Marbella. Well, Daesh criminals and some of the worst people in the world, when they've been caught, they come here to hide. Why? Because squatting, for example, this is another very important point. Squatting is very important. Because I think it's the source of most of the country's problems, the source of insecurity and crime. And besides, it's undeniable that it makes rent prices go up, that people don't want to rent out their apartments. The squatting laws we have in Spain are ridiculous. You don't find them in any other country in the world. That someone can take over your home, whether it's decent or not. I don't know of any other country where that's allowed, not even for an indecent home. No, none. It's something that makes no sense, and then the hippies will tell you they're poor, young, disadvantaged, that they're fixing up the house for you. And that's every day, every day, every day. And the television channels, thank God, are starting to show it. They're starting to change the paradigm a little bit. Because you can't cover the sun with one finger, and you have to go against the occupation. The occupation is a source of crime and injustice. Of people who are having a really hard time and have to sleep in their cars because their house has been occupied. There are tons of cases like this, tons of them. And it's outrageous that someone who has worked their whole life, for example, right now, I've worked my whole life. I've managed to buy a modest house, and here I am in Madrid, half worried that someone will take over my house, that they'll ruin my life. And that's how it is for many people, many families who are really the vulnerable ones. And maybe a mafia has moved in claiming they're vulnerable and that they can't be evicted. It's possible they have a child that isn't biologically theirs, brought in to help establish their criminal gang. This cannot be permitted. No form of squatting or illegal occupation should be tolerated. This must end and be stopped at the root. It can't happen in any serious country. In Europe, evictions take less than 24 hours, while here it can take 2 years, which is nonsensical.
And really, you have made me activate my mind, and I've started thinking about what you said, because I had never thought about it before. And actually, in Barcelona specifically, there is a direct correlation between
the
occupation and crime. And
the youth detention centers too. There are 3 data points: occupation, youth detention centers, and violent crimes. These 3 criminology factors are directly
proportionally related.
And the map clearly shows that the hotspots are mainly concentrated in Catalonia, which has the highest number of all the regions. More occupation, more immigration, and more youth centers are where there is the most crime. That's just how it is, exactly as described. The map of those 3 things is undeniable evidence, and it's a point I frequently raise. It's simply impossible to argue against it. There's just no argument.
No, the data can't be denied, but we live in a society, Jan, in which it seems that people are more motivated by wanting to look good. By a completely emotional speech and denying the facts, like saying 2 + 2 is 4. I can't argue with that. Let's do something about it. People, just to avoid being called out.
Racist, fascist, sexist, or whatever. Denier, but
it's just that the deniers of the numbers and the data are on the opposite side, consisting of progressives and the left.
Carefully.
Institutional left, the left that's in the government. Because today, have you been with Roberto? And Roberto, I don't know if he still considers himself left-wing or not.
But he's a guy with common sense.
I also know another left-wing girl named Paula Fraga who doesn't reject common sense either. Many people are ideologically positioned in Marxism. I won't share my personal opinion on Marxism. It's well known that I'm strongly anti-Marxist and I will die being anti-Marxist. But it's just another topic. And listen, it also happens to me with some PP voters who say or believe they're aligned with us, with what could be called dissent, anti-globalism, and opposition to Agenda 2030. And at the end of the day, the leader of their party also wears the pin right here. So why do people deny it? Why do you think, Jan, that people deny the numbers? And why do people believe in supposed political parties that position themselves against this whole agenda? What they're really trying to do is lead us exactly to the situation we're in, which
is not positive at all. Well, that's exactly why I think they've created a common imaginary enemy, especially sexism, racism, all of that is the same thing in the end. And all of this is exactly what you say. The fear people have of being called racist is what keeps them from acting in the face of what any reasonable person can see are injustices and things that shouldn't happen. But they turn a blind eye. Why? Because they've been made to believe that there is. Well, they polarize society and pit us against supposed groups that they themselves have created. Like the fascists and the progressives, like the Catalans and the Spaniards, like the right wing and the left wing. Men and women above all. Because, well, we can say that the woman's brain is programmed today in Spain, especially, and in the West, to reduce birth rates. But the man's brain is also programmed to have less testosterone and to act less in the face of injustices. To bow their heads, and I see that a lot, that people don't want to confront, that people want to bow their heads, be more comfortable, let others think for them. And well, no discomfort at all. It's like they're sheep that want to follow the flock, and that's how it is. There's nothing more to it.
unfortunately, we live in rather complex times in which reason and logic have been lost and emotionality and speeches.
Alienated with.
What is considered morally correct is what prevails. And those winds are changing in countries like the United States, like in Argentina. But here in Spain, I get the feeling that we're always late. Here in
Spain?
There are still too many people being deceived. And sometimes I feel bad about it. To take on such an arrogant attitude of saying, I'm right. But with the numbers in hand, I have no choice but to tell you, are you being deceived? I don't believe in that false modesty of telling people that all opinions are valid. They're not. If you don't have the full picture, if you don't have the data in hand, if you don't have a complete view of the situation, your opinion is not valid. You have the right to express your beliefs, even if I disagree. I will always defend that right. But we have to leave behind those opinions, that discourse, that everything is valid when there is no information. And unfortunately, in this country, if you keep watching television, they put on real leeches of power and government. People who are completely aligned with the official discourse. And those who keep watching television, obviously, will never open their eyes.
Exactly. All of this is social engineering. It's older than hunger itself, but it keeps getting more refined. Just as we have access to more and more information, there's also misinformation in that information. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense because a lot of people don't have the full picture of what's going on. Maybe they live in upscale areas or only watch La Sexta. So is it really that they can't see all these people, all these facts that, for example, we're bringing up? People like Rescue or people like me who walk down the street showing the reality. And really, that's it. I mean, it's like we said at the beginning, it's not so easy to realize that you've been deceived. First, you have a shock in your mind and you say, no, it's not possible. Denial is the first stage where you start to see, even if it's subconsciously, that you've been deceived. The first thing is always to deny it, because it's hard to accept that I was foolish. For so long, they've made me believe whatever they wanted, and that's why it's hard for people to accept all this.
Do you think ego plays a role
When it comes to admitting that I've been deceived?
Have you always thought
that way? That's a good question.
Have you ever been progressive at any point in your life?
Well, when I was a kid, a teenager, I mean, let's say until I was 15 or 16, I considered myself an anarchist. So, yeah, I was definitely on the far left, you could say for sure. I used to have a shaved head and a mohawk, and I hung out with some anti-fascist skinheads. Do you want me to tell you something? Me too? Yes, me too. We admit it and we don't.
It's no big deal. Me, my awakening I wasn't a socialist and I never I'm Venezuelan, so I never sided with Marxism.
But yes.
I remember thinking in high school, because there were a lot of teachers who would put that idea in your head.
And they would shape you?
And the cool thing in high school, in my time, it was to go against Mariano Rajoy's PP. And are they bad? We would go to the march for public health care. We would go to the march in favor of education because the teachers would urge you on.
Is doing it also very Spanish, but
I woke up, Jan, when I went to live in Panama in 2016.
It's been almost 10 years already. Damn, a lot of time has passed.
And I remember seeing many of my fellow countrymen, Venezuelans, people with engineering degrees, selling bottles of water in the traffic jams on the highways of Panama.
And that's when I said,
damn, all the story my teachers have sold me is just that socialism is something that works, it's something positive. How is it that this ideology and way of governing forces my educated compatriots to go to another country to sell bottles of water? Under the scorching sun with 82 degrees Fahrenheit and 90% humidity trapped in highway traffic. I said the one we have in Spain, and that's where I started. I started informing myself and realized something was happening. That's when I discovered channels like Jotadobs to form my own thoughts and realize how they have deceived me. How the educational system has pushed me into a way of thinking that's completely disconnected from reality.
of course, the educational system is designed exclusively to make us envious and turn us into employees, so that we never think for ourselves, only to obey. Legendary fact by Jan Facto, exactly. Why? Because those in power aren't interested in people who can defend themselves. They're interested in us being dependent, or people with assets, exactly. Or people with financial education, because that's power, and they want all the power for themselves.
Possible. They want
Submission. Oh, so that's something that has been happening a lot for many years in Spain, and we're heading in a direction very similar to what Venezuela is, what Argentina is, what Cuba has been, what Cuba is. So all of that has been promoted for many years by the elites, by the schools, by the media in Spain, promoting envy, promoting people not working. Calm down. I actually remember, and I'm sure you remember too, that when we went to school, the cool thing was to say, no, I never study. Yeah, me neither. That was what was cool. Like, no, I'm not interested. You know, like acting uninterested in everything, uninterested in the bad sense of the word. I mean, like nothing matters to you. That was what was cool, right? And now what's cool? Well, it's getting paid, working as little as possible, going out to vacation and not much else, and obey. And that having money, progressing, working for yourself is frowned upon. This is frowned upon in Spain. The United States can teach us a lot in that regard, but not in other areas. But when it comes to entrepreneurial culture, entrepreneurs are looked down upon here.
Spain, if there were an Olympics for envy.
Yeah, we would be champions, but every year we would be at the top of the medal table.
I don't understand where that mentality of envying others comes from in the United States. Today I have billed €1 million. Well, no, this year I've billed $1 million.
And they listen to you attentively. I'm going to learn here in Spain, you say,
I'm billing this money, and your own friends, your own people, your own
circle envy you and start looking at you weird, and
they wish for you to fall. And that's precisely why it's very important to have a circle of people who are happy when things go well for you. Contrary to what people think. I don't know what you think, Jan. It's much easier to be there during tough times, because in tough times it's easy to be supportive. It's easy to help them because, after all, you don't see someone close to you in a position of power. I think it's an extremely valuable sign that when things go well for you, the people who truly love you will be deeply and genuinely happy for you.
Genuinely happy for you. I completely agree that this is the ultimate definitive sign that someone cares about your well-being, that they don't wish you harm. They want to be close to you when things are going well for you. And going back to what you were saying this is out of ego, that they don't want the sheep, that, well, to admit that they have been deceived. Exactly. It's because of ego, and ego has nothing to do with self-love. Self-love and self-esteem are something we all need more of. And if you have it, I thank God that I have self-esteem at the level of Cristiano Ronaldo. Just to give you an example, the man, well, now I feel invincible, and that's what really allows me to do what I do. If I had doubts, I simply wouldn't do it. It has to be feasible for me to commit to it. But of course, that's the difference between ego and self-esteem. Self-esteem is what will give you quality of life, health results in business, in whatever you want. Self-esteem is essential for starting a business. And respect. Respect for yourself. Exactly. For others too, but if you don't have it for yourself, you won't be able to have it for others.
Could self-esteem be defined as the intrinsic respect you have for yourself?
Of course, of course.
People, especially men, are driven by respect. A man who lacks respect likely struggles with poor mental health. I don't think so.
I think that
It's very important to feel respected. And many people don't respect themselves, so they can't demand respect from others.
they say they'll start going to the gym on Monday, but keep delaying it. That's not respecting yourself. Eating junk food, that's not respecting yourself. Doing cocaine, that's not respecting yourself. It can't be. And that's why I don't want any kind of toxic influence from being around people like that. Because it doesn't bring you anything good. Because the frequency, speaking like holodose, that you get from these people is something toxic. It's toxic for them, for you, for the whole environment. It's not positive.
Well, Kayan, I really want to ask you so many more questions. We could talk about so many more things. I'm sure we'll have another conversation.
Same here. This place is amazing. I've been very comfortable. Are you really comfortable? Dude, yeah, it's cool.
It's cool. You'll likely return.
Let's hope so.
Keep doing what you do. And I'd like you to say something to the audience to wrap up this first show.
Thank you very much, Sashota, for giving me a voice, for bringing me here. And you really have to fight for what you believe is right, for what you believe is worth it. Disregard others' opinions, television, or labels like racist or fascist. What you think, if you are really honestly searching for the truth, then it will be honest and it will be enough. That's the attitude. Learn every day because we can always learn. No one knows everything. And that's the mindset to have.
A pleasure. Nice to meet you guys. I'm going to make it clear that I'm going to ask him some much more questionable questions, but they'll only be available in the private community. I want you to know that I really appreciate everyone's reaction to the whole launch of Testoret. With everything I've stirred up this week, I love you all so much. I'll see you next week in another show. And whoever wants to continue this interview a little more personal and with questions that members of the community have written to me, will leave the link below. A big hug and see you in the next episode of La Factoria. See you later.